Hello, this is behind the inspiration of Shadow. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link below so you can see that video. So the inspiration for this piece, for me, really came from this question. Are people ever completely gone? And I tried to answer that question, and it was very hard to do, and the piece kind of changed a lot from what it was originally. I guess that's okay. I'm reassured from Ben Lerner, who said that I always assume that you don't write the poem you want to write. You don't make the book you want to make. On the one hand, that can be kind of depressing. But on the other hand, that's actually quite free, because it means you discover something in the act of composition that you didn't know in advance. Generally, I think of art as really about trying to actualize impossible desires with form, and you always fail to make the virtual actual. You always fail to transform the world through your poem or whatever, but the failure itself can be beautiful or pleasurable, and it can kind of exercise imaginative faculties that aren't exercised when you're just making things you know how to make. Alright, I used Friendly Neighbor, Dollar Bill, and It Makes Me Dizzy. Those are actually based off of a neighbor. Dollar Bill kind of comes from my girlfriend's dad, helping him count his money, and Makes Me Dizzy comes from my girlfriend's mom. She's kind of going through challenging time, and she feels dizzy some of the time, so I wanted to incorporate that. The line that says humanity's shadow doesn't change over time, I got that from David Mitchell. He was talking in an interview about the human heart, and he said, well, the human heart and the human mind don't change that much. The human heart probably doesn't change at all. Jealousy back then is the same as jealousy now, and it will be the same in 700 years in the future. Another line in the poem is, some mysterious force of love gracefully turns my gaze back to it and whispers, you know what you must do what is right. This was inspired from Jojo Rabbit. There's a scene where Jojo and his mom are together, and Jojo turns and joins his mom, who's staring at a makeshift gallows, 5 dead bodies. Men and women hang from the crossbeam. Jojo says, yuck. Jojo tries to turn away, but Rosie, his mom, takes his head and turns it back to the view. Rosie says, look. Jojo says, what did they do? Rosie shrugs, what they could. Come on. Another line was this line about generational forces of trauma, exploitation, pure greed, and racism. Pure greed comes from my girlfriend's Ida, her writing from the piece called Wildfires. You can see that in our channel. The term generational trauma, I first heard that from Resmaa on Being Podcasts with Krista Tippett and Resmaa. And Jin Lee also talks about this too, the author. In an interview or talk, she was talking about how she said, I definitely think that all of us suffer from the untold stories in our families. And I think sometimes you can even look at people acting out because there's some secret 2 generations ago. I really believe in all that stuff about intergenerational trauma being carried down in ourselves. And interestingly, I think they did an experiment where one generation of mice were conditioned to be terrified of cherry blossoms, and what happened was 3 generations later, the mice even though they weren't conditioned to be scared of the cherry blossoms, those mice in the latter generations were terrified of the scent of these cherry blossoms. So there is this kind of trauma being carried down in ourselves that Jin Lee talks about. Another line is, I'm not scared of these hurtful forces. I'm scared of unleashing these hurtful forces onto others. This was again from David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. Frobisher, one of the characters, he says, afraid of them? No, I'm afraid of being one. Another line, I quote this directly, is, less harm is not a small thing. This was Robin DiAngelo, and it was part of a longer conversation from On Being podcast, where Robin DiAngelo and Resmaa Menakem, I might be pronouncing that wrong, they were the guests. And yes, the whole sequence went as follows. Robin says, policies have to change. That's not my skill. My skill set is as an educator. I want to help you see it and feel it in a way that you cannot see it anymore or feel it anymore, so that you have to do something. You can't go to bed tonight and be at peace with yourself if you can't answer the question, what did I do today that was anti-racist? As a result of this work, I do less harm, and that is not small. Less harm could be one more hour on Resmaa's life, that he didn't take my nonsense home and have to decide all night whether it was worth it to try to talk to me about it, or whether he risks it getting worse, or whether he should just swallow it. Less harm is not a small thing. Another line that was inspired by other artists and thinkers was, there exists the compassionate heart, but also the heart's shadow. This was inspired by the philosopher Solzhenitsyn. He writes, if only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But gradually it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. During the life of any heart, this line keeps changing place. Sometimes it is squeezed one way by exuberant evil, and sometimes it shifts to allow enough space for good to flourish. One and the same human being is, at various ages, under various circumstances, a totally different human being. At times, he is close to being a devil, at times to sainthood. But his name doesn't change, and to that name we ascribe the whole lot, good and evil. The next line I want to talk about is, those aren't my true colors. That's the hitman overshadowing my true colors, devouring my authentic and decent soul. This is from a book called No Visible Bruises, a book about domestic violence. And the author writes, when a man's belief system is challenged, he goes into fatal peril. And that is the moment where violence is a choice. Man Alive uses a kind of hokey phrase for this moment, when a man's inner hitman comes out and his authentic self disappears. A hitman operates in silence, alone. A hitman blends into a crowd, destroys people in stealth, then disappears. A hitman takes no responsibility. A hitman has no moral center. Decent Soul really comes from Rutger Bregman's book, where he argues that, he asks the question, are people fundamentally good, decent, or bad? And he argues that fundamentally human beings are decent. Maybe what makes us bad is power and other forces. The next line I want to talk about is, so how can I fortify my heart against this hopeless assassin and my heart's shadow? I really love the word fortify right now. It comes from Jason Reynolds, and he had this to say about it. Ultimately, I think my role, for as long as I am in this plane and doing this work, my role will always be to figure out how to create fortitude in the minds, spirits, and bodies of young people. I'm trying to fortify them. We need young people to activate their imaginations. If they cannot, if they don't, if by the time by high school your imagination is shot, we're in trouble, big trouble. So how does one keep an imagination fresh in a world that does double time to suck it away? How does one keep an imagination firing off when we live in a nation that is constantly vacuuming it from them? And I think the answer is one must live a curious life. One must have stacks and stacks and stacks of books on the inside of our bodies. And those books don't have to be the things that you've read. That's good too. But those books could be conversations. It could be about this time taking the long way home and seeing what's around you that you've never seen, because most of us, especially city folk, we stay in our little quadrants, the 5-block radius, wherever the coffee shop is, and the school and the church. But what if we were able to walk the other way? What if you were able to explore the places around you? What if you were to speak to your neighbor and to figure out how to strike up a conversation with a person you've never met? What if you were to try to walk into a situation free of preconceived notions, just once a day? Once a day, walk in and say, I don't know what's going to happen, and let's see. Let me give this person the benefit of the doubt to be a human. The line from the piece that says, I'm less hopeless with friends, that comes from the book The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. The horse says, you fell, but I've got you. Everyone is a bit scared, but we are less scared together. Tears fall for a reason, and they are your strength, not weakness. And then there's this whole section where I talk about family and friends, and it's inspired by a Star Wars scene, but I won't spoil it. Talking about my mom, dad, grandparents on both sides, girlfriend. A lot of my cousins appear here. The way they look at cars. Choi. 24 comes into play because of that's my dedication to Kobe Bryant, one of my favorite basketball players. The outdoors comes from cousins and friends. The line, these adventures are food for her soul, that's inspired by In the Heart of the Canyon by Elisabeth Hyde. She writes, they passed up ski vacations and trips to Mexico to save their money for this particular trip. One year, when both children were in college, they traded Ruth's paintings in exchange for their fare. Didn't they get tired of the same old trip? People would ask. Didn't they want to see other places? The truth was, they both felt a renewal of the soul while on the river, something that their friends in Evanston, churchgoers all, failed to comprehend. Vegan comes from a family member who has been vegan for years, and also a lot of my cousins enjoy games, different kind of games, card games, video games. The word repurposing comes from Ben Lerner's The Topeka School, where he talks about repurposing language. I don't have the exact quote, but I loved how he talks about it. When I talk about the clothes I wear bring me closer to them, the books and movies remind me of them, even a single blade of grass unites us. I have cousins who love clothes, cousins who enjoy watching TV shows and movies, so I was just thinking about them. And Single Blade of Grass, that was inspired from Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. She writes, Penny loved when that happened, when a single detail rebelled against the package. She wanted to touch it. I think I also like the single detail rebelling against the package, so I wanted to put the single blade of grass there to kind of rebel against the previous words. There's a line that says, I am generations of people. That's inspired from Star Wars Sense8 TV show, and also Cloud Atlas themes. Another line, when I feel I'm doing nothing, I'm not really doing nothing. This is inspired from, once again, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. The boy says, doing nothing with friends is never doing nothing, is it? And the mole says, no. I have a line that says, I conquer by persevering. This is from The White Darkness by David Grann. He writes about people in Antarctica, traveling and conquering in Antarctica. And there, walking across the majestic deathscape, was Shackleton, a broad-shouldered, handsome man who seemed to embody the motto of his family crest, by endurance we conquer. Another line, by not ignoring the forces I despise and by remembering the ones I love. This was inspired from Star Wars: The Last Jedi. There's a line that says, that's how we're gonna win, not fighting what we hate, but saving what we love. I use the phrase another world, and this is inspired from Cloud Atlas. The line is, I believe we do not stay dead long. As soon as my Luger lets me go, my birth next time around will be on me in a heartbeat. There's another world waiting for us, Sixsmith, a better world, and I'll be waiting for you there. The last line of the piece is, I know so much about their deaths, but now I'll learn more about your lives. This was inspired from Loving Vincent, a movie about Vincent van Gogh, and just a beautiful movie, paintings. The protagonist is trying to figure out who killed, or how did Vincent van Gogh die. And so he's talking to someone and he says, but don't you care that some bastard might have gotten away with a murder? And the woman responds, you want to know so much about his death, but what do you know of his life? Thanks for listening. That's the majority of the inspirations. Like, subscribe, check out other videos. Goodbye.